Hello everyone and welcome to the new video of Python tutorials for beginners series. In this video we will be talking about why we're using functions in Python, why functions are so important in programming, how to implement them in Python, and what are the parameters and arguments and functions mean in Python. So if you want to learn more about these topics, let's get into the video. Also, if you're interested in more content for beginners in Python, you can check out the pinned comment for the full series of Python tutorials for beginners. So in programming, there is a concept called don't repeat yourself. And functions are actually a key to implementing this concept in Python. So don't repeat yourself basically means that don't repetitively write the same blocks of code in your program. And you may say, yeah, but you might need those code blocks executed more than once in our program. So how are you going to manage that? And that's exactly why we have functions. So basically you define a function and you pass in whatever code block you want to execute when that function is called. So let me just show a simple example to demonstrate functions. In Python, we define a function by using the keyword def, which stands for define. Then we write the name of the function. For now, let's just write a simple function that greets a person. And then we open and close parentheses here to indicate it's a function. And then we just put a colon to indicate this is a code block. And then just like we would do while writing any code block, we indent all the code. And for just now, let's write a print statement that says hello there. And this is probably the easiest and the simplest function you can write in Python. And here we actually defined a function called greet, which when we call it, it will just print hello there into the screen. So let's just call the function, and how we call it is basically we just write the name of it, and then we open and close parentheses just like we did while defining the function. And when we execute this code, we will see that the output hello there actually printed here. And we could have called greet once more here, and then when we run the code, you would have seen hello there 2 times because we've called this function 2 times here. So basically with the functions, you're able to run any lines of code inside this function with just a simple and single word here. Now imagine if we had to print hello there for like 10 or 20 times in our program, which would probably be the case for some of the code blocks in your program because they might just be so commonly used, and you might just create a function for it, and then instead of copying and pasting it, you just write greet each time. When you wanted to change anything, for example, let's say instead of there we wanted to write programmer, and then we run this code. Now it's running programmer in each of the function calls. If we didn't have this in a function, we would have written this code line separately in each of the places we want to run it. And then when we wanted to make a change on it, we would have to make change in each of them separately, one by one, and that would take a lot of time. So functions are very useful for writing better code. But of course, functions have much more functionality than what we've shown here. And obviously, this is just a static function that always prints hello programmer or hello there as we've initially done. And we can do much more with functions. So just to take an example, we can define some parameters inside the function. So let's say we have a name parameter and we want to use this parameter inside our function. So while calling this function, just like we called earlier, we want to have someone pass in a name. And let's say John. We want to use this passed in variable or argument inside our function. And how we will do that is we basically define the variable as a parameter at the top here, and we just need to use that name variable here, and we can basically use it just like this. And just to make things clear, when we're defining the function, the parameters we select are called parameters, whereas while calling this function, the variables or the values we pass into the function are called arguments. So that's the difference between arguments and parameters. Parameters are when defining the function, and arguments are what we pass into the function. And so let's run this code and see what the output is. Here we see hello John. And after designing this function like that, we could also call it with another argument. I would say hello Alp. And now we run this code, we see hello John and hello Alp as well. So basically we can call this function with whatever value we want, and it would be printed in different cases in contrast to the first example we've seen, in which it always printed hello there. So creating parameters are actually pretty useful while defining functions, and it helps us call a function in many ways. But when we define a parameter here, and if we don't pass a parameter, so let's just don't pass any arguments here, and when we run the code, we will actually see an error, which is saying a required position argument. So we haven't passed any argument here, and this function was actually expecting us to pass the argument for this name parameter. But when we didn't pass it, we got an error. And how to fix that? Sometimes you might just want to call greet methods like this, and we would want to have a default value which printed in a case we don't pass a name value. Actually, fixing this problem is very easy, and this is by creating a default value for that parameter we are creating up here. And for this case, let's say our default value is there, just because when we don't pass a value, let's say we want it to print hello there. And when we pass in a value, let's say greet, and when we pass in arg, we want it to greet arg. And let's see the output now while running the code. Okay, in the first one, we didn't pass any values, and the function actually got the default value, which is there, and it printed default there. And when we passed in a value here as an argument, it printed the name as that argument and printed it that way. And when we create a parameter this way, we basically call the argument we're passing in as an optional argument, which basically means we don't need to pass in, we might just like to pass in, but when we don't pass in, there will be a default value which is used in our function. Okay, now I believe you understood the main differences between an optional argument and normal arguments and parameters in general. So let's just remove all these. Also, as you might remember from the for and while loops video we've done, we were just able to type in pass, and that would basically do nothing for the loop. It would just pass the loop. Just that way, we're able to use this pass statement here. And another very useful way of using functions in Python is actually for getting a value. So functions have the functionality of returning you a value. And let me just show you an example. I'm sure it will be more clear in our mind. So let's define a function just like before, and let's for now call it cm to inch, which is basically centimeters to inches. And we will be expecting to give it a length value in centimeters, obviously, because this function will be responsible for converting it to inches. And let's just write it. So inches is equal to centimeters divided by 254, I believe, and I hope that is right. So basically, we will calculate it by defining an inches variable, and we will divide the length by 2.54, just like this. Now we will return this inches value from the function. And this return value is basically the value this function will be giving us. So we will be inputting a value length into this function or passing it as an argument, and we will be expecting this inches value returned from this function. And we could just print this inches as well here, and this would basically print the inches for us, but we wouldn't be able to access that inches value inside our program. It would just print it to the screen and the program would be over. But now we're getting that by returning this inches. We will be able to access that inches value, and maybe we will be able to print 5 times inches or 6 times inches, or we will be able to execute any operations with that value. So getting that value will always be helpful for us. And as we're returning a value from this function, we'll basically want to store this return value into a variable, or we'll want to print it. But for now, let's just store it into a variable, and let's call it inch length. And we'll just call our function just like before, cm to inch. And let's pass in 100 centimeters for now. And this function will basically get this 100 as our length, and then divide by 254 to get the inches value, and return us the inch value. As this function is returning that value here, we will be storing that value inside this variable here. And then we print the inches length here, or sorry, inch length here, as we've named it up here. Let's just run the code and see the output. Here we're getting 39.3 as the inch value of 100 centimeters. So this is basically how you could use the return keyword inside a function. And it is super useful because you're able to pass in a value and you're able to do any operations. It could be more than 100 lines. In our case, it's just a single line, but in a function, you could just write more than hundreds line of operations or code inside it, and then you'd return a value to use it from that point on in your program. And you could use that function as many times as you want in your program, which would save you a lot of time from copying and pasting or debugging your code, and it will be super useful. And also, you might have noticed, but in Python, actually, there are a lot of built-in functions. So actually, this print function itself is a function as well. It it is called with, just like we were calling our function, it is called with closing and opening parentheses, and you pass in an argument here, which you want to get printed onto the screen. Or, as we previously covered, an input is actually a function as well. You basically call this function, and in the console, you see you are requested to give an input as the result of this input function. Also, we've covered int function, which converts any value given inside it. So let's say 15. This int function converts this to an integer value. And there are many and many built-in functions like this in Python. And I will leave a link in the description to a resource covering all of the built-in functions in Python that you can look at. And I think this would help you massively while understanding how functions work in Python. And okay, this was it about this video. Obviously, functions are very important and they are very commonly used and they can get pretty advanced as well in Python. But for now, I just kept it for beginners. I just kept it simple for beginners, and I hope it was easy to understand. I hope it was useful. So if you like this video, please leave a like and share it with your friends.